If we could take our seats. First item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next is the minutes of August meeting. However, it's not really August, it's the July meeting. We do have July's, I believe. Or was that June minutes? Oh, this is the June meeting that we didn't approve. There's still corrections that need to be made to this. Can I give them to you? So we're talking about the minutes of June 5th now. Second paragraph. You have a second line of the second paragraph. You have developer, comma, architect, no comma. You need a comma there, attorney. Going down to the paragraph that begins with Mr. Deming, 332 Ironworks Way. Third line up from the end of that paragraph where it starts, the indicated that they would be adding. That should be they indicated, not the. Last paragraph on the first page, the developer's counsel, wrong counsel, C-O-U-N-S-E-L. Second page, third paragraph down, what is the plans in terms of lumens? It should be what are the plans? Third page, about engineers are concerned about the right-of-way. It should be right-of-way, O-F. Moving down where it says Planning Commission questions. The first bullet point, the sub-bullet point, it says there is a signed easement with the dentist to the east. I don't think there was at that point. I'm not sure if there is now. Does the board recall that?
I don't think he wanted to sign it, right?
That's what I understand.
He didn't want to sign it. He doesn't want to
Okay.
any kind of formal agreement. I thought that's
I believe your mic's not on.
I don't think, I think
I don't-
it was he didn't want to do that.
That's what I recall also. So we can clarify that maybe when we get to that part of the meeting. Moving down on that, has trash been moved around? It's not trashed. It's, I believe, trash and not a capital T. Are there any other additions or corrections? If not, is there a motion?
I move we accept the minutes
Second.
Once we can.
as corrected.
As corrected, okay. Second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And that was the minutes of the July meeting. So we still need the, no, I'm sorry, June.
That was June's meeting.
Okay. So we need July and August.
We have one in July.
When might we get those?
I believe that was the July meeting.
Okay. That's kind of what I thought, but it says June, so that needs to be corrected too. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm wrong on that because it says minutes of the June meeting were approved. So that is the July meeting. Okay, so we're looking for August. First item next is the 409, 411, 413 East Lancaster Avenue, preliminary subdivision and land development plan. Who would like to speak to that?
Thank you. Good evening,
Hi.
Madam Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. We are back before you, and we have a number of things that we would like to review with you tonight. We were last here about a month and a half ago and had gone over the plan. Certain items were of particular interest to you. The plans that have been resubmitted, and I don't know whether we have an electronic copy that we can put up here or whether we have Joe Mongeluzzi has the site plan. But one of the things that was of interest and concern to you was the sidewalks and the proximity of the sidewalks to the curb. As you know, we had shown a 2-foot verge, what we believe to be consistent with what the township was looking for along that stretch of Lancaster Avenue. I think a number of you had some concern, particularly with the pedestrian comfort provided by a 2-foot verge, and wanted to see something a little bit more creative, a little wider. And we have modified the plan to show a 4-foot verge that is, and if we can get that focused.
Doesn't help.
That's a little busy, Joe. Yeah, let's. Yeah. Well, if you have the site plan. So what we have done is we have started the verge at the end of property that is owned by Emerson, not necessarily part of this project at 405. So the property is just west of 405. We have angled the sidewalk away from Lancaster Avenue so that at that point along our property frontage from 405 all the way to 413 and through the property that is really part of this application, which would include the adjoining property to the east that we've called the dentist property. And it stays as a 4-foot verge there, crossing the driveway entrances and angles then back to Lancaster Avenue where the sidewalk now exists. So we have increased that verge to 4 feet along our entire frontage. And I think that is a good balance between the topographical elements that are in that area and the desire for more grass, safer grass verge strip between the curb. So that is shown on our plan and something we're very willing to do, provided, of course, it receives your recommendation and the commissioners follow suit and feel that 4 feet in that area is appropriate. That does raise questions as to what the sidewalk improvements may be on the properties that adjoin east and west, but if we get it right along our frontage, that's a good start. So we have done that. There have been, there's been a visit to the Shade Tree Commission. Lisa Thomas is here. And Lisa, if you would like to just stand up and say one word about the Shade Tree Commission and their comments on the plan.
We received a recommendation for approval from the Shade Tree Commission. They asked us to look at treating some of the green ashes on the property, the existing ones, to help preserve and protect them as far as we can. And they accepted trees to the township, money to be paid for the trees. So they seem to be fine with everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And then Joe Mongeluzzi from Mominy Inc. is here, and Joe can highlight a couple of the plan modifications and what has been done since we were here last, particularly with respect to sewer and other matters. Joe?
Okay, good evening. Since we were last here, one of the comments was we were to meet with Public Works to talk about the sanitary sewer on the property. Since then, we've discovered that it's been difficult for the Public Works Department to maintain this part of the sewer system. There's the large tree that we're taking down, the 42-inch, their roots have compromised the pipe, and there's multiple patches that they've put on the pipe. Pipe has very shallow slope, and the capacity is kind of inhibited. So what we've done is we've offered to, working with the Public Works Department, we've offered to put in a new sewer main across all our properties, 405 to 413, and Public Works is in agreement with what we're proposing. They've offered in turn to make the connection across Lancaster Avenue for us, because that's been difficult for them also. The second item that we've talked with Public Works about was the stormwater pipe. We assumed incorrectly that there's a sewer catch basin further west, further east, that we assumed connected to this catch basin over here, and that pipe does not exist, and so therefore we've made modifications to our plan so that we connect to the back of the existing catch basin that's right here in front of 405 East Lancaster Avenue. So they were the major things that we were talking since the last time we were here. As far as I know, I don't want to speak out of turn, but we met with Steve Norsini, Ray Daly, and Steve Arnett, I think his name is, all from Public Works, and they were all happy with what we proposed, and they're in agreement. And from what I gather, this will be a big help to them remediating a problem that's long been standing with Radnor Township.
What?
Some other minor items that we did, we made some of our hard islands mountable curb to make easy access in to the front parking lot. We received some minor comments from the town engineer and the traffic engineer regarding signage and some other miscellaneous stuff, and they're items that we'll clean up as we get further along. But in general, the plan is essentially what you've seen before, but the main items are the sewer and the stormwater that we've clarified.
What waivers do you still need, or are you requesting?
As far as I know, we may need a waiver for, what do you call it, off-site loading and unloading. That's the only one that I know of.
That would be a variance, not a waiver.
Variance, yep, I'm sorry.
The waivers are listed on page 2 of my letter.
Yeah. Thank you. That is correct. This is the, well, I think the August 28th letter.
Right.
Yeah. So they are listed. Before I get to the loading space, I'd just like to mention a couple of other things. As you know, we have had discussions, ongoing discussions with the Pembroke North Condominium Association, and since we were here last, we have drafted and submitted to them for their review an agreement pursuant to which we would make certain parking spaces available from Friday evening through Sunday night to that condominium for their reasonable use as needed by guests. And we have provided that agreement. They've reviewed that agreement. We've exchanged some comments on that agreement, and I think we're essentially in agreement on that. In addition, pursuant to our discussions, Pembroke North had prepared and submitted to us a statement of understanding of certain agreements, covenants that we are willing to abide by, provided the plan moves forward and we obtain the approvals of the plan as essentially submitted this plan. Obviously, understanding that there may be small modifications to the plan as a result of your input and also input from the commissioners when we ultimately get before them. So I think we've made good progress with our immediate neighbor who is affected by this application, our immediate residential neighbor, which is to our north. With respect to the loading and unloading space, there has been a lot of discussion on this, and I had prepared and submitted to your solicitor, Mr. Nelson, a document that set forth our alternative legal positions that range from our plan complies to the zoning board determined that our plan complied to we received relief from the zoning board. Mr. Nelson has responded to us that he thinks we need to resolve this from a zoning perspective, with Mr. Kachansky making the final call, whether he would agree with Mr. Nelson. Of course, we did hear from Mr. Kachansky, who has indicated that he is not going to take a view different from that of Mr. Nelson, so it is a zoning issue. Mr. Kachansky had suggested that we follow up with John Ryan, who's the solicitor of the zoning board, and we have done that, and I think Mr. Ryan now has it under advisement, and we expect to hear back from him very shortly with regard to his view of that issue. Now, if Mr. Ryan agrees with our view, the zoning board may say that we don't need any relief, and that was implicit in the decision that we received from the zoning board. Alternatively, the zoning board could say that we intended to specifically address a decision on your variance, alternative variance request that you had presented to us, and since our opinion didn't address that, we would like to have you come back before us. So there are different responses that we might receive from the zoning board. If we have to go back to the zoning board, and my hope is that we don't, but if we have to go back to the zoning board, then, as you know, under the code, the zoning board requires a recommendation from you as to whether you think the relief that we request is reasonable, proper, in your opinion, what your opinion is with respect to that relief. So we would hope that we could get a favorable response from you with respect to our proposal for loading. And we have discussed it with you before, what the existing condition is with regard to the 3 properties that are being affected by this application, which are 3 separate commercial uses on Lancaster Avenue, each served by driveways. And what the existing condition is, particularly with regard to what is the repetitive, everyday use of a loading, unloading space by the UPS trucks, the FedEx trucks that are arriving at all of our commercial offices on a regular basis. As you know, we have photographs showing those deliveries being made by the delivery trucks pulling up on Lancaster Avenue in the right westbound lane, overlapping the sidewalk. So you've got a one tire or a couple of tires on the right side of the truck over the curb onto the sidewalk. They stop there, put their flashers on, run in, make the delivery, and get out of there as fast as they can. What we will have now for all 3 of those properties, which are consolidated in this application, is one delivery at the rear of the building, and we propose that that delivery be taken by what would be the normal activity of these delivery trucks, and that is pulling up in one of the drive lanes, which would be the right side drive lane, put on the flashers, run into the building, make the delivery, come out, and be on the way. And that's how they do it in our complex. That's how they do it in most complexes. Whether or not you have a dedicated space, the drivers do not want to be pulling into those spaces and having to back out into an aisle of traffic when they're only going to be there for a very, very brief duration. And that type of situation, were they to be behind a car that is parked there for whatever that duration is, a minute or so, that person isn't blocked in any meaningful way. The delivery truck is there. They'll be out in a moment. If they should be delayed, everybody knows where they are. They're right inside the door as you enter the building. So we would submit that our proposal is not only infinitely better, maybe not infinitely, but a whole lot better than the existing condition, and it's the practical way in which deliveries will be made to the property. So to create within our green area, protrude into what is the green space between the building and the parking lot at the rear with a 30-foot deep space, changing something from 20 to 30 there just doesn't make a whole lot of sense in our view. We think it will work fine. So we would ask that you say something favorably about that being a reasonable and satisfactory arrangement in the event we would need to go to the zoning board. So that is the long and the short of it. And if I've been unclear, I apologize, and I'd be happy to try to clear that up and answer to any of your questions.
Actually, I'm surprised that John Ryan would make a decision for the zoning board on, did they hear that section of it?
Here's the way we had presented it to the board in the notes of testimony and in a separate exhibit.
However, at the end, excuse me for interrupting, they say zoning is permitted in precisely this manner as shown on the plan.
That's
They're
right.
very specific on the way zoning, you know.
And that's one of the reasons we believe that the board very clearly addressed it.
But
in our
was that
view.
mentioned there?
No.
The board didn't say that we met the front yard requirements. The board didn't say we met all the side yard requirements, or that we met all of the other zoning requirements, bulk zoning requirements that are applicable to our plan. We presented the plan to the board, saying that, with testimony that this meets all the requirements. With respect to the zoning, that loading requirement, we said to the board, we don't believe it applies, and we told them why. And we said, if and only if you disagree with us, then alternatively, we request a variance. The board approved the plan as submitted and did not treat that as a variance. So I would submit that the clear implication of that is the board agreed that we met that requirement, and as we met all the other requirements, the height, the bulk, the yard setbacks, the impervious cover, all of that. It didn't comment specifically you met the zone, you met all those requirements.
I
What
understand.
it says, we approve that plan as submitted, and we grant these variances. I think a fair interpretation of that board's decision and a fair reading of it is that they agreed with our position and did not believe they needed to address whether a variance was appropriate, whether it should be granted or denied.
Okay.
Well,
Rather than argue that
Yeah.
point.
Right.
I have.
Right. So that is
I have a
under-
bigger point for you, but I'll let
Sure.
you finish.
Yeah. I was just going to say that's under advisement by Mr. Ryan. So I don't have an answer to you for that.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
No, but we're happy to answer any questions.
Okay. So basically, do you agree with everything that our staff is asking for?
Yes.
All right. Roger, did you have any comments?
No, I don't.
Okay. Amy?
No, I do not.
Anybody else? Peter?
Other than just to reiterate what Mr. Fromhold said, I did give him the opinion that he either needs to show compliance with the section regarding the loading berth or obtain an interpretation or variance from the zoning hearing board.
Okay, thank you. All right, here's my bigger issue.
Sure.
And I have said this from day one, before we even saw a preliminary plan, when we saw a sketch plan. I think your access is totally inadequate. For this large building, the driveway that is actually on your property is less than 12 feet wide. One 12-foot, we'll call it, driveway that is one-way only. Now, you own the properties, your client owns the properties to the west. They have other options. They can fix this. You're showing the access to that property on the property to the west that is not part of this development. So I don't think you should. I think if you're going to do that, you should combine that other lot into it and make a entrance, both an entrance and exit, that is a good entrance and exit for this property. I think you have the ability to do it. I think this is a completely unsafe access to be driving along, have to jam on the brakes to make a right angle turn into this. I have said it from day one on this. The first time we've seen this sometime, I guess with spring perhaps, and I believe other members of the board have also. So do other members of the board have any comments on this?
So, I was driving west on Lancaster, I don't know, maybe a week and a half ago, so summertime, and there was a bad accident just to the east of this building. It actually involved the big, the cars and the police were all around the building that's just east of you, I think where they're talking about putting in the apartments. And why I was struck by it is that it looked as though a truck had been trying to take a very sharp right-hand turn into the back of this place, and I don't know what happened. I happened to lie after it. Why I say that is that it reaffirmed for me, Kathy, what you were just saying about the access. And beyond that, and Mr. Frummel, I understand that people use Lancaster Avenue the way that you're saying they do with regard to the deliveries. It's a really unsafe situation when they do that. When UPS trucks and FedEx trucks stop on Lancaster Avenue, a 4-lane highway, to make a delivery, and they pull over into the sidewalk to make a delivery, it's either because they can't be bothered to go around back, or there isn't a sufficient loading zone in the back, or it's too tight of a turn for them to get in. And several of those things, basically what you're asking us is to sanction a plan that would have that continue to happen instead of making that better. And it would even be an improvement for me, although I don't know how you enforce it, to tell the UPS and the FedEx trucks that they do have to come into your driveway, and that they do have to park in that, even if they park in your parking lane, in the back of your building to make their 2-minute delivery. You're basically saying you think it's preferable from the township's perspective to have a truck parked out on Lancaster Avenue blocking traffic on, effectively in both directions because of the slowdown it causes, and inconvenience everyone out on Lancaster, rather than have that truck pull in the back of your own property and inconvenience the 4 or 5 parking spaces in the back. Now, I understand there's a whole issue about whether or not you actually need the loading zone, and, I agree with Peter that it needs to go to zoning on that, but if you're asking for our support, it doesn't make sense to me that I would support a plan that would continue to have a truck parked on Lancaster, and now the driver doesn't run in the front door. The driver now has to get out and run around to the back of the building because that's where the access is. So maybe I misunderstood that part.
I have confused you, for which I apologize, or I'm confused. Currently, for the 3 buildings that are here, these 2 plus the one that exists in the middle where the addition will be, there will be a demolition. Currently, vehicles pull up along Lancaster Avenue and straddle the sidewalk currently. Under the proposed plan, that will no longer happen. That will be a thing of the past, done. What will happen is that those delivery vehicles will pull in the back and pull over somewhere in the drive aisle.
Okay, I understood you to say they would still do it in the front.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, I apologize.
And I apologize that I said anything that would lead you to believe that. No, we're not doing. So that's why I said not infinitely better, but certainly a whole lot better. In fact, probably as good as it gets, because that's what's going to happen, I think, as a matter of fact, and what does happen at even the finest, newest office buildings with any loading zones or anything. That's how these delivery trucks operate. I have pictures in front of our own building where we have all kinds of loading zones. That's exactly what they do. I have them on my camera. I'm not going to show them to you. But that's what they do. They put the flashers on and they run in.
Here's my issue with the situation here, and I think it's also Kathy's. I think what's going to eventually happen is, because of the limited turning radius on the west side, which is the only entrance side to get into this complex, the trucks are going to almost have to come to a stop to make that right-hand turn. Yes. And at some point, the driver is going to say, hey, it's not worth doing this. I'm just going to pull up like I used to and run in the door. I think ultimately the potential problem here, and is for me, and I'm not sure if it's the same that Kathy has, is that the drive is so small that you almost have to come to heading west to make the right-hand turn, almost come to a complete stop to make that turn, which then traffic starts backing up.
And actually, a truck trying to make that turn would have to go out to the left to kind of pull in like this.
Yeah. Can I address that? And I'd like to address it myself, and I'd like to call our civil and traffic engineers to address it too. But here's my view. As you know, we're in the Villanova Center. Beautiful complex, Starbucks, it's hopping there now, really nice. That's our situation for turning in the driveway. It is. You have to slow up as you approach the driveway and make your right turn in. There's only one lane that goes in. You have 2 lanes coming out. So that it's a very similar situation. What you have instead of a building, which we have to the left of our driveway, you have 2 cars that are right out near the street. We have no conflicts on this one-way drive, and it can accommodate trucks, and we've provided that information. I'm not going to steal the thunder of Joe and Frank, but Frank, can you address that from a traffic point of view?
How wide is the drive you're driving into Villanova?
Yeah.
Oh,
Is it 12 feet? I mean, you're not supposed to ask a question unless you know the answer. Unfortunately, I don't know the answer.
Okay, well, actually, you can ask the question. I'm supposed to know the answer, and I don't. So, and you got me on that. But it is one lane that turns in there next to 2, and you have a lot more going on there. You have cars.
But you also have a
out.
light there.
Yeah,
But
there's
it's
a light
wider,
there.
and there's a
Well,
traffic light. Yeah,
While
right.
you have a light, you also are relying on the fact that the drivers behind you are slowing up in response to your tail lights going on, because that is the lane right after that entrance. Shortly after that, you have the entrance to the Blue Route going northbound.
But you've also just gone through another intersection, so you're probably already slowed down. And the
And you
way
have
that
the
intersection
potential.
normally is, you're crawling.
Right. I'm going to punt to the traffic engineers. on
Isn't
this.
there a left turn lane there?
You have the potential to get in, that's the thing. If you're a big truck, you have the potential. It's whether you even have the potential here to get in. And you've got the slope increasing, you've got a narrow drive, and you can't ask the curb to move out of the way. The cars can back up.
Plus,
if
you
a
have
big truck
parking
is-
along that one lane. You have parallel parking next to the building, and if somebody is pulling in, trying to park, although I would never park there,
There is nobody that would pull to the right.
What's that width, right there? What's that?
Pardon?
Frank, what's the width of that at the entrance?
I'm going to ask Joe Montoluzzi
Here you go.
Susan,
give
took
you
the
that.
words out of my mouth. Joe's checking that. You
You
made
know,
the dimension already. I believe it's 16 feet.
Well, we accept
16
your,
in the drive.
we accept your offer.
Here you go.
Well, at the building that you're
16.
talking about as an example, excuse me, isn't there a left turn lane and also, as well as a light there?
yep.
The cross-section of Lancaster Avenue is just a 4-lane cross-section. There's no dedicated left turn lane in this area.
At
I'm not talking
Villanova,
about this area, I'm talking.
at the example cited.
The attorney gave an example of where his office is and making turns there, and I'm suggesting it's not the same situation as what I understand the situation will be with this particular project, where there will not be a left turn lane, and of course, there's not a light.
That's correct. I believe you're right on both counts. There is no light. There is an eastbound left turn lane at Villanova Center. The left turns, ironically, without the left turn lane or with it, are actually easier to accommodate than the right turn, because as you can see on the screen, that's showing a box truck making a left turn going into the driveway. It's not coming close to hitting any of the curbs. And that's because when you make a left turn, you have a larger effective radius. You have a larger arc of movement going into the driveway. When you're making a right turn, as Ms. Stern pointed out, that is actually, and Ms. Bogosian, that's actually a tighter radius because you're right up against the road. But in both cases, it's an improvement over the existing situation, firstly, both in terms of the radius, which basically doesn't even exist today in any of the driveways. This radius is significantly larger. I think Joe was going to let me know what that number was. I think it's 10 feet at a minimum, which is the PennDOT minimum. And then the actual width of the driveway is 16 feet at its most narrow point as you come into the site. And it's wider, actually, if you include the 2 radii, it gets as wide as 26 feet, I believe. As you go further into the site, it necks down to about 13.8 feet. Both of those widths are wider than a standard travel lane. If you're driving along Lancaster Avenue today, you have sections of travel lane that are 10 feet wide. So the most narrow point of the throat of the driveway is about 40% wider than travel lanes along Lancaster Avenue in various locations throughout Radnor Township. So if they can accommodate trucks on the main line of Lancaster Avenue, obviously they can be accommodated here. But there's no question that a truck is going to slow down, possibly even come to a brief stop in order to make that turn. But that's only going to be for a moment as it's actually entering the site. There will be a slowdown of traffic briefly behind it as the truck is entering. Since the entrance to the building is now the back of the site, I believe Mr. Falcone was talking about his concern, which I thought of as well. A truck heading west that wants to make a delivery may be tempted to repeat the sins of the past and continue stopping in the middle of the westbound, or not the middle, but the right side of the westbound travel lane. I think he or she will find out in short order that it's much more complicated now to enter the building because the front door is on the back of the site. So to really quickly run in with a parcel or a package is actually going to be faster if they actually drive into the site and go back and temporarily block a few parking spaces, as Ms. Stern and Mr. Fromhold pointed out as well. So on the whole, I believe entering via left turn is certainly effectively easily done, even without a left turn lane because the radius is larger. In the westbound direction, the right turn radius, although an improvement over the existing situation, will result in a slowdown of large wheelbase vehicles that could even briefly be a velocity of almost zero, but only for a brief moment in time. I believe the trucks will go to the back, make the delivery, and leave out the driveway, which is all right turn flow, which is also a two-way driveway. And I think if necessary and have to swing just a little bit in order to accommodate the right turn out, that will possibly happen as well. I'm sorry, was someone asking a question?
Yeah, my point is that both the driveway in
Yes.
and half of the driveway out is not on your property.
The
Not-
driveway in may not be on the particular parcel we're talking about tonight, at least not in its entirety. But as you pointed out, it's under a parcel controlled by the applicant.
I realize
Yeah.
that. That's my point. Why can't you combine them?
Well, for that question, I'll punt back to council, but let me answer the second question you asked about for the outbound driveway. Most of the outbound driveway is actually on the this application's parcel. There's a very narrow section right along the building at 413 where it goes down to something like 11.8 feet in width. And again, as a practical matter, there are travel lanes on Lancaster Avenue that are significantly more narrow than that. They get as narrow as 10 feet.
But you're building this new. You're expanding the property. It's a property is much larger, or the building is much larger than what originally exists right now, even with, well, it just is. Why don't you improve the situation? You have the ability to do it. You own the property west of this, not you personally.
I understand. Even if something was done with the entrance driveway, that would not necessarily address your concern about the 0.2 feet for a small section to the east of 413. And my only offer here is that that is still significantly wider than the minimum travel lane accepted by PennDOT to accommodate trucks on state highways. So I really believe from a traffic standpoint, from a travel and circulation standpoint, there is no problem for the outbound driveway. As far as the entrance driveway and part of it being on 407, that's something I really can't address because that's more to the applicant than to the traffic engineer.
Mr. Giovanni, did you
Yes.
do turning, Amy, did you ask for turning radiuses?
Yes.
Have you seen them?
Yes, and there were just a few that's what you're looking at right there. And there were a few things that we saw encroachment that they need to make adjustments for. And may I point out that this has not been vetted out by PennDOT yet?
Well, that was okay, so that's my question.
Right.
Only to the extent that they received a pre-app application.
Right.
And they did comment on the circulation generally. And we're fine, and actually, lauded the applicant for, again, the improvement of closing certain driveways and not replacing them, but rather closing them and reducing the number of potential points of conflict. But as far as an HOP application, that has not been approved, and there's still the potential of PennDOT comments.
There hasn't been a detailed engineering review. So in general, PennDOT has approved the concept, but there's still some engineering review that has to occur.
Well, I'm not objecting to the flow concept necessarily. I'm objecting to whose property the driveways are on. Because your applicant owns the property to the west. They have the ability to make a proper entrance and exit on their property. Do you have the easement on the property to the right? A full easement?
When you say the property to the right?
East.
To the
The
east?
dentist's office?
Yeah. Basically, our driveway is a driveway that has been used for access.
That wasn't my
to
question.
the rear.
Do you have the easement?
Well, we don't need the easement, but for a sliver, if you will, of that 12-foot width, we have basically our 11-foot driveway on our own property.
So that would
so-
be one way in on your neighbor's property, which is the same owner,
Yeah.
and one way out, which is the only driveway that hits Lancaster Avenue on this property.
Basically, and we do not have an easement over the neighbor's driveway to the east to enter our property. Our only entrance is, as we've shown, between 407 and 409. We are going out largely, almost solely on our own property. That there is a driveway there now that functions in and out for that property, but we're only going to go out on that
I understand
driveway
that.
in the future. So we're actually reducing our use of that driveway in the sense that we're reducing it from two-way to one-way. The property that is to our east will get an easement from us, as we have shown on the plan, over our driveway that's on our lot, that 11 feet plus that's on our lot, in order to exit onto Lancaster Avenue. With respect to the other side, the west side, 407, I think we had indicated, and you had rightfully noted at the last meeting, well, should that ever come under different ownership, would you have an easement right for the benefit of this proposed development over that portion of 407 that the driveway runs? And the answer is we will create that easement and are fine with a condition that would be a condition of approval that we create it presently, so that it presently goes on record, not when the title is separated between 407 and 409. So we would create that easement presently. So Joe Mangialuzzi might have any further comments, but with respect to this, the adequacy of the entry drive, but our view is it's very wide at the entrance for one way, and I think Frank had indicated it does narrow, but it's still between the two buildings, but it's still 40% wider than a travel lane on Lancaster Avenue, so that for one-way traffic, we believe it is plenty large, and to widen it really would be creating unnecessary impervious surface. Now, as you know, we have physical constraints if we're going to keep those buildings at 407 and 409, which have been nicely improved with valuable improvements by Emerson. So they would like certainly to keep those buildings. That's really essential to this plan, that they maintain those buildings. So we have a kind of a limited distance between the walls of those buildings to put the driveway. But even if we had more, even if those buildings were further apart, for one-way traffic, which is the design of this plan,
I have a
we
question.
believe that it's more than
Not to interrupt you, but I'm trying to figure out how you're going to stop or limit people coming in the east entrance, since the dentist is going to be coming in the east entrance. I know if I were a delivery driver and I could make that turn over here to make a package delivery in your building, I'm turning there, because that's twice as wide, because that goes in and out, right? Now my truck's pointing west. You know, potentially I could now make the left-hand turn and come, what you call the one-way in is now become a two-way street. How do you stop that?
Well, I think we stop it in a number of ways. Number one, we don't have an easement. The dentist isn't going to tolerate. The dentist isn't going to tolerate
Here's my
that.
problem. If the car in front of me is a dentist patient, okay? I'm a truck driver and say, oh, I'm going to pull in here because it looks like I can pull in here because I'm going to this building and it's a wider opening. How are you going to stop the person in front is the dentist patient, the car behind is not a dentist patient. He's coming or she's coming to your building. So they're gonna just follow it in because it's an easier turn.
I guess the same could be said for a lot of situations where you have properties that have do not enter driveways and all. It might be an easier turn to go in something. What we have is we are going to have our primary entrance with our primary signage between 407 and 409. That's where you will enter this property. The dentist will have his signage down at that driveway. We're not proposing any signage down there, so there shouldn't be any confusion as to where you enter when you're making a delivery to one of our addresses, and I think it's something that is, you would hope people turn in the right driveway. You always have that possibility, even on your own street, somebody turns into your driveway when they meant to go into the neighbor's driveway. I don't think there will be that. Is it possible? Sure, it's possible. But it's possible now in a whole host of situations up and down Lancaster Avenue.
I think that I'm not saying that it's potentially. What I'm saying is that the people will take the point of least resistance. I think what I'm arguing, and potentially Kathy and everyone else is that your one way in, as you call it, okay, is basically, at least in my estimation, not adequate for this complex. And I think that's the major issue here, is getting the cars safely and trucks safely in, not necessarily out, but safely in, using your one way, and potentially not them taking the other way, because that's the easiest place to go.
And I'm going to suggest to you that the point of least resistance is coming in our entry driveway. If you were to come in the dentist driveway and have to drive up here, first of all, you're going in a direction where you cannot get out. The flow is clockwise, not counterclockwise. So that truck would get in there and have to be backing up to get out. No way they're going to come in that way. And no way they're going to come in and negotiate between these row of parallel spaces in a one-way aisle, in that aisle that's in the front of the building, between the building and Lancaster. The course of least resistance is to come in a nice wide entrance, coming down a nice wide one-way aisle that is immediately to the west of 409, go through the back, drop off.
I have two suggestions. Do you know across the street how they have the little park across the street?
Yes.
Do you know what the entrance and exit looks like at that park, coming off of?
Yes.
Do you know how they have like a Y, like a V? How they have a little peninsula in the center?
Right.
Could you consider that here, so that people coming off? And that's why I assume that's why they did it. You can actually turn onto that road and actually be going at somewhat of a speed. So there's that type of entrance and exit. But then also just make your radius a little bit bigger, so that you can get your tires onto there when you're in the side position. But
Okay, so you're saying make the radius larger for westbound traffic, making a right turn
westbound traffic, making a right-hand turn, even if it's just at one side, make that a little bit wider. Because you're right, it is wide. The street is, the entrance is wide, but it doesn't matter, because when you're when you're traveling straight, you don't need a wide drive.
I don't disagree with that.
So if you make the radius bigger, or do what they did across the street next to the park, and have a Y. So when you're turning in left, you come in, and when you're turning in right, and there's a little peninsula in between, and that way they can both come in. Take a look at it. It's
No,
right
no,
there
I
by
know,
the
I
park.
live there, so yeah,
Yeah.
I know that. Kathy, I have a question, kind of a point of order. So they came in tonight looking for preliminary approval, but now there's a question of whether or not they have to go back to zoning, and they're waiting for some determination from Mr. Ryan, although our solicitor and our zoning officer both say they have to go back to zoning.
I don't think John's going to.
I'm
John's going to
just
say,
saying
show up in front of zoning.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's what he's going to say, knowing John.
So you're going to have to come back to us, or are you looking to go into a possible zoning hearing with support on the plan as it stands?
Here's my dilemma. My dilemma is I don't know, as I stand here tonight, whether we're going to have to go back to the zoning board. But if we do, then we need a recommendation from you, and I'd rather not delay that recommendation for another month. I'd rather, get that recommendation from you on that narrow issue, as to the loading, and it would be, the recommendation that would be contingent upon a decision that we do need to go back to zoning.
I get that, but so then, beyond that, I thought they're asking for some waivers.
we are.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of slope issues on the property, and they
So you-
need waivers for the slope of the
So-
parking lot.
Yeah.
Roger said he didn't have an issue with the plan, but you're still going to be seeking these 3 waivers.
That's correct. And let me say, if you've been to the rear of these properties, while we need the waivers, it's relatively, and I say relatively flat. You don't perceive that there are slope issues when you go back there. But I guess when you do the grading with the code, technically, we need a waiver.
We have been looking at this for several months, and
We keep saying the
nothing
same
really
thing.
has changed. You're polishing it up a little, and the design of the building is different, and I think it's more attractive than it was in the beginning. However, I think the major concerns, at least my concerns, are still there, and they're exactly the same as they were in the beginning. So I think we can make a decision on this based on what, let's assume they go to zoning and they give them the variance, they give them the variance on everything else, and this is minimal. The plan's still the same. Do we like this plan or not? I think we need to make some sort of decision on this tonight.
Kathy, should we hear from just the public
Sure.
on their general?
First, is there anybody else on the board that has an issue?
I do have a question. It's on page 3 of Roger Phillips' August 28th, 2017 review. Page 3, under subdivision land development, paragraph 3. And it deals with section 255-29, capital A, number 7 in parens. No one area of off-street parking of motor vehicles shall exceed 30 cars in capacity. And then Roger goes on to observe, the plan appears to comply with this section of the code. However, the applicant has requested a waiver from this requirement. And my question is, why would you be asking for a waiver if you comply with the code?
Originally, we had asked for that waiver, and since then, we had made modifications to the plan, and we don't need that waiver anymore.
Okay, thank you.
Are there not 30 parking spaces in the rear?
Yeah, but they're separated by an island.
The islands, the fingers, I think, break them up. They're not continuous.
May I make one final comment before we get comments from the public? They're obviously concerned with regard to right turns in. We believe that our geometry here in the radius complies with code. To the extent you would be more comfortable, and to the extent that PennDOT would approve a wider radius, I had just spoken to Joe. Joe Montralise, we could do a wider radius there to facilitate, make it a little bit easier for a driver, whether it's a truck driver, a car driver, whatever it might be. And I think we all agree if you have a little wider radius, it is easier to make that right turn. So that's something that we'd be willing to do.
Before we go to the public, I had one more question.
Sure.
I noticed the sidewalk construction goes on to 415. Are you proposing to do that, or is the
Yes.
applicant?
Yeah, we would propose to
And
do
is that curb that the sidewalk goes through, is that a new curb on 415, or is that an existing curb at the street?
So we would transition this angled piece here, and we would stop right there.
But
So all that curbing would be brand new.
Is that going to be different from the existing curbing?
As far as I know, the existing curbing's concrete.
Is it a
and,
different radius? Or a better radius?
I'm not sure. I think this is a better radius, what we're proposing.
So you have in some way permission from 415 to go on his property and extend the sidewalk and change the curb?
Well, technically, he doesn't own, that's...
Right, because it's right away.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. His property line is right here.
Can we go back to the planting strip issue? Sure. So I have my Saldo book, and it says, no one area for off-street parking shall exceed 30 cars. Separate areas on a parcel shall be physically separated from one another by a 10-foot wide planting strip and concrete curb. I'm not sure that these little bump outs, that's how you separate 10 parking spaces from one another. Where's,
Hey, Joe, can you count the spaces? I believe there's 30 spaces back there, and that's the requirement, not
oh,
the 10-foot.
so it's not about the island.
But
except
let's
there's
count
no
them
more than
anyway, just
30
to make
anymore.
sure.
No, that's fine, Roger. That's where the numbers came from. So it's 32.
Yeah, so it does need a waiver then because it's more than 30.
If that is the interpretation, then yes, we would need a waiver on
Okay.
that.
Yeah, I mean, it spells it out more clearly in the saldo that it has to be the 10-foot wide planting area with the concrete curb. So those bump outs, we use those for every 10 spaces. Right. But you have 32 spots? Correct. Okay, so you will need the waiver.
The way we understand it is if you have more than 30, you have to have an island to separate them, and that's what we have.
So that's it between every 10. The island is every 10 spots. For 30, you should have the whole thing should be separated.
And let me say, I think and I understand how you're reading it, and if that is the, no, I do not. I don't think we have been advised that that's the interpretation up to this point, but perhaps we've just miscommunicated on this. If that's the interpretation, then we need that waiver for 2 spaces.
Kathy, so what's the situation here? Are we tabling this? I really
No.
think we have so many outstanding
Let's
issues.
well, I think those issues are going to be outstanding forever.
Well, we don't have, they haven't had their application before PennDOT yet, so we don't even know if they're going to approve this.
Well, I'm not sure. They've applied for it. I don't think they can get that until you have a
I think that's
approved
usually done during the
preliminary
design
plan.
process.
Is that correct?
We wanted to get a preliminary approval from the Planning Commission, then we would apply to PennDOT. We didn't want to go before then.
Because things could change?
Well, we wanted to make sure we had all your comments before we went to them.
Amy, are you usually at the table for that discussion?
I should be, and I believe that Mr. Tavani has been including me in the discussions. I do realize that they have not made a formal land development, like a HOP submission. They have submitted their TIS and had those discussions with them. So the only thing that they have not seen is the final design that's right here. Am I correct, Frank?
Yeah, that's all correct. And what Mr. Mangialucci said is also correct. We did approach them. We did show them the plan. They did bless the plan conceptually. And then we halted because we wanted to make sure that we still had a plan to really advance. And until we get through this process, there's no point in tying up PennDOT with going any further. We need to make sure that we're all on the same page at this level. We went there first. We got the preliminary blessing. Now we're here, and then we go to that next level of detail. Sometimes PennDOT doesn't want to even see us until we get a little further at the local level because they have other plans to review, obviously, as well.
Okay, any other comments? Things we haven't addressed from the board? Pardon me? Okay. There's one other problem I had, but again, this is going to my same issue, which is your trash is being stored again on the adjacent property that is not part of the subdivision. Why is that? Maybe that other lot should be part of the subdivision. Again, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but
We are, if that is your recommendation, we will certainly include 407 as part of this application. We can do that. We own it, and
Thank you.
it could be included. Yes.
Finally.
And I'm sorry if I didn't,
Yeah.
I should have made that clear. Absolutely, we can do that. We're not proposing to consolidate that lot.
oh, that's
with
what I
the
wanted,
others.
consolidation.
Oh, okay. Well, I was looking at that as 2 separate questions.
No.
It could be part of the application without a consolidation. In terms of, and I really don't know that it makes any difference whether it's consolidated and it's part of the application from a traffic flow and an entry.
Well, it
point of
doesn't.
view.
However, excuse me, this is too much stuff on one development. And that's why you're oozing over onto the sides. The other, the property to the east and the property to the west. So if you're going to have this much of a development on these 3 lots, I think you would have made it more comfortable and possibly a better plan if you included the next lot to the west. That's
And-
been my point from the beginning.
And Patrick and others can correct me if I'm out of bounds here, but my understanding is that really, if it were included and it were consolidated, we wouldn't be looking at any different geometry, configuration, entrance, driveway. We'd simply be showing it as Z'd in, and instead of it being part of the same lot where the driveway was located, we're asking, or we're proposing that it be an easement, and that we accept the condition that we create that easement, which we would do.
I think we agree to disagree. I understand where you're coming from.
Kathy, do you want to put a motion on the table and then ask for public comment?
No, I was going to ask for a public comment
Well, they
first.
should know what we're, no?
No, I think we normally get the comment before we take a position. Is there anybody from the audience that would like to speak to this? Come on up, please, and identify yourself.
Cynthia Roberts, 321 Ironworks Way, and it's more in the form of a question. It was posed last time we met whether or not there was going to be any more permanent hiding of the cars with evergreens rather than deciduous trees, or in addition to at the total rear of the property, because there's going to be so many more cars that we will be staring at. So the question was, has the landscape plan been altered in any way to address that?
We'll check. Come on up, please.
One point I'd like to make is that there are fewer cars in the back with this plan because we're putting more in the front. So there'll be less cars when it's improved than there is today. But what we did do was understanding that there's a solid wood fence along the property line, existing mature deciduous trees overhead. We've added some evergreens where we could tuck it in between some of the trees adjacent to the parking lot. There's also some existing shrubs today that also are behind the fence. So the height of the fence is the tallest, most solid thing we have right now.
6 feet?
Yep.
Or taller?
It's
6
6
feet.
foot. And also, I want to remind everybody that the parking lot is is lower than the grade of Ironworks Way. It's right. So not only is there a 6-foot-high fence, the cars are probably about 3 feet lower than the actual driveway surface of Ironwood Way. So there's a lot of good things going on here in terms of minimizing the impact of the cars that'll be there. And again, there's less that will be there than there are today.
Thank you. Anybody else from the audience? Yes, come up, please.
Thank you. My name is Peter Bowler. I'm at 313 Ironworks Way. And my concern is the same and request.
Can you lean into the
My
mic a little more?
request is, again, that consideration be given to more evergreen trees. It's not just an issue of looking at the cars. It's interrupting the view of the building from our properties.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other neighbor care to talk? Okay. If not, is there, board, what are we going to do here?
I would move personally on, is to reject this application.
I second
Grounds
that.
There's so many different issues.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of
Well, we're recommending denial is what we're saying.
recommending denial, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? You recommend approval. Okay, so that is 1 to 1 to 7 for denial. Sorry. Okay. All right. Thank you.
That would, you got that number backward.
Kathy, it was a recommendation of denial,
I
7
always
to
do
1.
things backwards.
Oh. Okay.
Kathy, do you want to do a motion on the zoning issue also, since they have the right to leave here and go in front of the zoning board? So maybe this board wants to make a
Okay.
recommendation on that also?
Is there a recommendation from this board to approve the lack of a separate loading and unloading on this property? Or feeling or comments?
I think it has to go to zoning board. I think that's their decision.
But they want a recommendation from us. That's generally what we're doing now. Before, we recommended denial on the other zoning things that went to zoning, and they approved it anyway.
Yeah, Kathy,
I don't have a hard time with the way they're proposing the loading thing. I think that's.
Quite truthfully, I don't either. on
Yeah,
the-
my
okay with
concern
either
is
do.
more
But that just gives them more room to do.
Hang on, my concern about it is that in recommending that they would approve that particular variance, because I agree with you, practically speaking, is that somehow the zoning board will take that, they will
As a
infer that as in
test or
approval of the
that we-
plan.
And I kind of was thinking about that loading, and I was trying to figure out how to do that, but what would happen would be where they have some of these parking spaces to leave a couple, three of them, but I don't know how that affects the number of parking spaces needed for the size of the building. If you were to leave a couple, like three of those parking spaces that are just a loading zone so that the trucks could pull in there.
Yeah, that just points to the fact that they're
They're in
putting
trouble.
too much
It's-
on too small a
that's right. It's
space.
too- it's
And
too big- it's too big
the
a
reason
project.
that
I
there's
agree.
such a struggle to
That's
get the
why-
parking spaces in there is there just isn't the
Yeah.
land for the size that they're
So I mean,
proposing.
if they get relief from Paul, then they got to get relief from John, and then George gets in the
Yeah,
picture.
so we would
there are
recommend
too many issues.
requiring a loading zone as per our code.
And they can't actually do a loading zone.
Could if they had a
without-
smaller building size.
Yes, that's true. But they can't eat up some of the grass because they already have they're just barely less impervious than their current nonconformity. So they just can't pave anything additionally. So it would be, you're correct, they would have to give up parking, which meant probably a smaller building.
Although I'd be more inclined, I mean, and I guess there's a lot of information both ways, but I feel like the most important part right now is to get them off the street. So I'd be more willing to say, if we can get them safely off the street, and then I'd be more willing to give on how they're loading, unloading. It's just that there's a lot of pressure on the neighbor's property, even if it's owned by the same person, there's just a lot of pressure on that property to supply them with some of their needs, their access, their trash, their fire department too. So if we can get a better access, I'm more willing to give on the loading because I feel like it's the safety of the public.
You can also choose not to recommend. I mean, you can recommend for, against, or take no position on this.
I would move we take no position.
I second that.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded, and we take no position on the truck loading and unloading. All those in favor say aye.
I'm actually in favor.
Opposed? Anybody opposed to that? No? Okay. So
Thank
no
you very much,
recommendation.
And while we're disappointed with your recommendation, we appreciate the time and consideration you've given us on this, and we hope to be back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So these minutes,
Yes.
but you made some corrections.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, next item is Cabrini Master Plan revision. Do we want to take the Phase 2 part first, number 5, or do we want to take the master plan first?
I would suggest we take the master plan first.
Okay.
You agree with that? Okay.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, good evening. I'm Howard Holden. I'm Capital Projects Coordinator for Cabrini University. I am joined here tonight by representatives from WRT, our master planning firm, Site Engineering Concepts, our civil engineering firm, Aegis Property Management, Legal Counsel Kaplan Stewart, and members of the Cabrini administration. We came before you last month with Phase 2 of our previously approved campus master plan. We began this master planning process in 2010 and received approval of the plan in 2012. In 2014, we came to you again with the updated plan evolving around Phase 1 of the plan, an expansion of our athletic facility and related parking and landscape improvements. Last month, we came before you with Phase 2 of that plan, which is based around the need to make our campus more pedestrian-oriented and ADA accessible. Two major goals of this plan since its inception. This plan also includes the demolition of a residence hall, not at all ADA compliant, and which will be replaced with a modern ADA accessible residence hall. We had conducted a neighbor meeting before we came before you last month. And at last month's Planning Commission meeting, we extensively reviewed the plans and addressed the township's review letters. There are no code compliance issues and no major planning issues. During the public comment section, several neighbors raised questions regarding our plans, and you recommended that we conduct another neighbor meeting, which we did last week. In addition to that meeting, we hosted several walk-arounds with neighbors. We've listened to the concerns, we've made some modifications to our plans, and we're here tonight to seek the recommendation of your approval of this plan. In my 16 years with Cabrini, one of the changes we have seen is a noticeable increase in the number of people who come on our campus with disabilities. They are students, faculty, staff, prospective students and families, visitors, and grandparents. They come to Cabrini because they sense Cabrini is a caring institution, founded on Mother Cabrini's 1957 fundamental principle of education of the heart. Over these years, we have made significant progress in making the majority of our campus buildings compliant. However, our campus topography can be challenging for some. This plan has been developed to get vehicles out of the center of campus and make our campus more ADA compliant, pedestrian friendly, and pedestrian safe. Hence the need to place a parking structure near the center of campus where they can safely arrive and easily gain access to the university's offerings without barriers. I'll now turn the podium over to Richard King of WRT Architects to review the plan with you once again and describe the changes we have made to address our neighbors' concerns.
Hello, Rob Lambert. I'm going to jump in for a second. You had asked a question about proceeding with the master plan, which is actually our amended preliminary plan or going to final. If you don't mind, I'd like to do what we did last time, is really talk about the plan that we're proceeding with right now is the final plan. I don't think there were really any questions last time on our amended preliminary plan. The questions were really related to specifically the parking structure and the relation to the lights to that. So I'd like to, if that's okay.
Sure, yeah.
Richard?
I'm actually Richard King. Just to confirm, there's a few additional folks on your side today. Should I walk through a little bit of the plan overall before I get into just as a response to?
I could, yeah, why don't you give a brief tour there?
Just to give everyone just the lay of the land might be helpful. So this is just a map of the existing campus. This is the plan, the institutional development plan we submitted in 2012, which included a number of buildings, which included 2 parking structures, one on the northwest corner of the campus, one on the south edge, a new campus center, and a new dining center, and a new section of Loop Road here on the east edge of the campus, and new turnarounds on either side of the main entrance road here. Those were put in order to close the roads through the center of the campus. This is the preliminary plan from 2014 that was approved, which included the athletic pavilion addition, which is now built and being enjoyed by many students and community members. The new campus center in its same position, parking structure here at the west side and a parking structure at the south end, and a new extension of the campus loop road here on the eastern edge.
You didn't build the one at the bottom yet?
We have not.
Yeah,
no.
that's okay. Thank you. You said it like it was already built.
Sorry, already approved. That was the past tense aspect of it. Sorry. So this is the current plan. It's broken into 3 phases: phase 1 in purple, phase 2 in red, and phase 3 in blue. The phase 1, which we mentioned, was the athletic pavilion, which has already been completed. Phase 2 in red is in a few different areas. There is a new residence hall that replaces a Lanchi house, which is currently on this site. And then a parking structure here at the east edge, which was relocated in this version of the plan from the western location here. There were a number of reasons why it was relocated. One, there were issues and concerns that were raised actually in our discussions with you in 2012 and 2014 about the remoteness of this in terms of vehicular access and also the number of crossings, pedestrian crossings, and conflicts with vehicles. So that was an issue. 2, there were also concerns about its remoteness on campus and how much additional traffic would have to move through the campus to get to it, and recommended that we consider a location that was more central in between the 2 entrances at King of Prussia Road and Upper Gulf Road.
I'm sorry, you're saying that we said that?
In our dialogue with all of you, those were comments that were made during the
Boy, I
discussions.
remember that very differently.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I remember, I think I may have mentioned it about about having parking more centrally located.
But I thought
because
we
of
wanted a
walking.
garage up there so that some people we wanted a garage near that facility up there so that people would park up there and use it and that they could use that entrance off of Upper Gulf Road.
We also wanted the
Yeah.
garage on Eagle to be smaller,
Right.
and we suggested having 2 garages.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, all right.
So we had one large, to split the garage into 2 pieces, right, was the result of the concern of the size of the structure that was proposed on the south edge of the campus. The next portion, the other item which Howard alluded to in his introductory remarks, the placement of the parking structure here actually helps us solve a number of issues with ADA. We have some real challenges here in this corner getting some residence halls to be ADA compliant. And we also have some challenges getting parking that's ADA compliant. So the garage is positioned at a point on the slope. This is actually quite steep in here, not as steep as other areas, but steep. Steep enough to be a problem for ADA. And the garage actually allows us to do that, and this development allows us to do this by building ramps in this zone that allow us to have folks be able to move vertically up to the core of the campus, almost all the way up, and then the rest of the way they actually have to use the elevator in the garage to go the last 10 feet up to the main level of the campus. So the garage actually helps us facilitate that movement up to the campus, which we thought was a great benefit to increase the number of opportunities for disabled folks to be living on campus. But again, the placement of the garage in a more central location puts the cars really where people want to be parking, which is near the academic core, which is the majority of where people want to park. Just
go back just a quick second and tell me what the 3 green layers of you seem to have different gradations of green abutting the neighbors. What is that? The dark gray, the dark green, and then the lighter green.
Oh, sure. So the dash red line obviously is the property line, and then there are 2 setbacks.
Okay.
That are the first setback at 125 feet, and then the second setback is at 200 feet. And it's just the 2 different setbacks that the township has.
Okay.
And then there are limits of use for each of those setbacks.
Thank you.
The 2 structures, this is the residence hall at the south end, which is, again, is in the place of an existing house that's here.
And then the parking structure, as we showed it to you last time, which was at the east edge. And you see here, there's one of the turnarounds for parking here where the road would be closed from here forward, so this allows folks to turn around if they decide to drop someone off or just realize they need to go find a parking space another way. So there were a number of items that came up in the last meeting, and these are also the slides we showed to neighbors last week, and they gave us some comments on these as well, and I'm sure they will also share some of those comments with you tonight, but we'll walk through them with you. So they included providing a code-required ventilation for the parking structure while minimizing headlight visibility. There were concerns about cars moving through the structure and that those lights might shine out into the woods and then eventually to the properties that are across the woods. Secondly, maintain and augment existing landscape buffer. We brought some drawings with you to share the best approximations we have for what that might look like and how the garage might look to folks who live adjacent to the campus property. Installing artificial lighting to provide a secure environment with light sources shielded from neighbors' view. So we've got some suggestions for that. They're very preliminary, but give you an idea of what we're thinking. And then develop appropriate design treatments for the prominent location at the major entrance to the campus, which you'll also see in the image that we have in terms of how much of the garage you're actually going to see. I mean, in a way, the idea for this garage is to try and make it as, as reduce its impact, visual impact as much as possible, both from the campus standpoint and from the neighbor's standpoint, because it's right at the entrance to the campus. So for Cabrini, obviously finding a way to make it, to reduce its visual impact is an important factor in the design. So the first item to mitigate issues of headlights in the garage. The original plan for the garage you can see here on the left, and you'll notice that the east side of the garage had parking spots all along the east edge. And in looking at parking structures and working with our parking consultants, often the more annoying issue is the person that gets in their car, turns on their lights, isn't quite ready to leave yet, they're warming up the car, so you have prolonged periods of time where the lights are shining, and then they would be shining east. So we redesigned the whole interior of the garage to flip that around so that there would be no parked cars, there would be no car parking on the eastern edge. So it would only be the occasional person who's actually coming into the garage or leaving it that you might see some spillover light. So it would be occasional as opposed to something that would be more long-term and hence more annoying for lights to be maybe shining out into the woods. The other question that was raised is really a question of cars moving through the garage. And again, you can see this is a section cut through the garage. Here is Founders Hall to the west. And you see this is where the cars would be parked facing west instead of east. And so it's only an occasional car. The lowest level really wouldn't shine out because of it's so low. So you're really talking about the upper levels. And also we studied how big we need the openings to be in the structure. So the typical floor height is about 10 feet 8 inches from one floor to the next floor, and about 3 feet 6 inches is the solid guardrail height that we would have as the minimum we need, and the top of it comes down about 3 feet. So we've got about 4 to 4.5 feet of clear space that we need to maintain. So we've maximized the amount of solid area that we can have on that facade in order to reduce the amount of spillover light as much as possible. And we've looked at Escalades and the larger SUVs to make sure that those lights are still below the line of 3'6". We're still confirming those. If we have to go a little higher than 3'6" to make sure we clear that, we will do that. But we feel that will do quite a bit in those instances, where you just have cars coming around, not actually parking, to reduce the amount of light that would be spilling out of the garage at night. The other issue is there is parking on top of the structure, and so we are going to be using newer fixtures that have full cutoff lights. So this just explains
how traditional parking lot light fixtures work versus new full cutoff fixtures. So we get what's called light trespass on your older fixtures, what you might call the beloved Cobra head, which spills light everywhere. They're pretty obnoxious. So we got light trespass that's actually sometimes even above 180 degree angle. So this would cut off, so a full cutoff fixture actually has another cylinder around the light in order to push the light down to the ground, and cuts off a tremendous amount of spill light up into the air, or what we would call light pollution. So these fixtures are much tighter and reduce light pollution tremendously, and are what we call dark sky compliant fixtures, which are a priority for us in all of our projects. The exact number of these and the height of them we have to determine as we get into the detailed design of the lighting. We've looked at some strategies where we might put lights around the wall of the garage, and we can do that where there aren't cars parked at the outside wall, because where there's a car parked, for instance, once there's a car parked, you can't see the light, so it kind of defeats the purpose. But to the extent that we can put low fixtures on the wall, we will, in order to reduce the number of high fixtures. We've also looked at different heights. In our conversations with the neighbors, they asked about different height fixtures. Typically, these fixtures are either in the 25-foot high range, which is a taller one, and then there's more pedestrian scale ones, which are usually done around maybe 16 feet. So we're going to look at the ones that are closer to 16 versus 25, and we want to reduce the number of fixtures as well. So, but we want the light level to be as low as possible. So we're going to look at the right balance between getting the fixture height down and getting the coverage right, without it being too much light. If we push them up higher, we can use fewer fixtures, but there's more spill light. If we lower them, what happens is you then get a larger number of fixtures because you need the more space more frequently, but you can lower the lighting level. So we'll continue to work on the details of that as we get into that design. But the main focus here is to reduce that light as much as possible on top of the structure.
I have a question regarding those parapet walls that you mentioned.
Sure.
Before you move on to wherever you're going. Attached to the papers that we received was a memo or transmittal, Site Engineering Concepts. It's from Robert M. Lambert. Is that you?
That's Rob.
Oh. Well, either one of you can answer the question, because I think you referenced the height of the walls in the garage. What was the height?
The guardrail height is typically 3'6".
Because in this memo, or this transmittal, this is what I'm looking at, on the fourth paragraph from the top, the paragraph that begins, the parking structure was reoriented so the parking stalls would not face the east, as you've just discussed. And then in the third sentence, it goes, in addition, a 2-foot 9-inch high concrete walls surrounding each level of the parking structure, eliminating the potential for headlights to shine beyond the perimeter of the building. So, am I wrong? Can you?
I apologize for the confusion. We've been looking at trying to get them up as high as possible, and so 3'6" is the preferred height, because in discussions with the university, because it's also a safer guardrail for us to be at 3'6" instead of 2'9". So,
Aren't there any OSHA requirements for the height of those guardrails?
The OSHA requirement is a little different.
It's 42 inches, isn't it?
Yeah. So the 3'6" would be the typical height that we would typically recommend.
So
I would be at we can adjust the memo so it says 3'6".
I think you should adjust the memo. I mean, yes, absolutely adjust the memo, because the people out here are relying upon your representations on this issue.
Apologies. We were going to switch to Charlie Neer from our office, a landscape architect, who's just going to walk through all the different buffer strategy we have for the surrounding eastern side of the garage.
Hi, good evening. As Richard has already mentioned to you over here, that the dark purple line that you see, the magenta line here, is the property line, and the two lines that we see are the two setbacks that he clarified earlier, the 125-foot setback for the Category 1 and the 200-foot setback from the property line for the Category 2. Currently, the edge of the parking structure itself sits about 330 feet from the corner of the structure perpendicular to the property line. The quality of the forest that's here, of the landscape buffer, is pretty typical of what you find in Radnor Township for an old-growth forest in this part of the country. It is mostly dominated by oaks, beeches, and tulip poplars, but also within part of this woods are some existing hollies and rhododendrons, especially that line the drive coming up to the campus as well.
I'm sorry, could you tell me your name again?
Oh, I'm Charles Neer, N-E-E-R.
And what's your role?
I'm a landscape architect with WRT.
Are there emerald ash in there?
That same question came up at the neighbor meeting. The campus has about 5 to 7% emerald ash on campus. In the
How many
woods,
are in that area?
I don't know exactly. I would say 5 to 7%.
Okay.
But so it is some. So yes, we expect over the next 10, 12 years or so that we could start losing some of those. But it's not an emerald ash, or it's not an ash-dominated forest. It's mostly oaks, beeches, tulip poplars.
Okay, well, we can get back to that, but we're going to want you to figure out how you're going to deal with a plan for that, so that's okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Mail at the university, I think, has already been addressing that a little bit on campus, so I think Howard may come back and answer that question when I'm done. So this is the parking structure planting plan that we are working on right now. And we did present in front of the Shade Tree Commission, and we have the Shade Tree Commission approval dated July 26th of 2017. The site plan right now shows that we're planting over 193 trees in this particular area. Throughout all of Phase 2, the other sites, Residence Hall and the Western Turnaround, will be planting over 430 trees throughout this project. I was not here last time when this was presented last month, but I know that there was some concerns about the mitigation strategy and really sort of the extension of this buffer between the neighbors and the parking structure. And what we are looking at right now is a three-phased approach. The first phase is the areas mostly in groups of 3s and 5s that are directly between the parking garage and the park road. Let me first explain, before I get any further with that, let me first explain what the dots are that we're looking at right now. The smaller dark blue dots are really going to be the evergreen trees. That eventually they're going to be dawn redwoods, spruces, arborvitaes, so they're going to get very big and very tall. So we need room for them to grow in, and we've placed them around the garage. We also have smaller groups of these green dots right here that you see are understory trees. So we'll have, with the evergreens, we will have small groupings of redbuds, dogwoods, et cetera, in this area, and melanchiers. Along the bigger trees that you see here are the canopy trees. And similar to the way that the entrance along Upper Gulf is designed right now, we are looking at creating an alley of canopy trees. These would be deciduous trees, mostly oaks, sweet gums, some beeches along that area to create, because after all, this is part of the campus gateway, and we want to provide an attractive driveway along this area. The last area that we have as part of the buffer is trying to plant within what we consider to be holes within the existing tree canopy along this side of the road. We are cognizant of the fact that when we put these in, we need to maintain them. So contractors need to have hoses that we can water these trees. So we're looking at planting close to this area because of its access and proximity for maintenance, as opposed to wandering further into the woods and trying to plant. What we're looking to do in this area is trying to find where the gaps in the tree canopy are, and we're trying to fill those gaps as much as possible. This third layer of planting has some deciduous trees, but it's mostly evergreen. And I think this area is fairly flexible in terms of where it's planted. A survey is only as accurate as we can get, but being out in the field, and especially standing along the back of the property line, we can help position these so that we can really try to maximize how much we can screen the parking structure. What we have in this photo is the existing trees and understory. And in the background, we've photoshopped in and we've modeled the parking structure that Richard was just talking about with Founders Hall in the background over here. This photo is actually, with the exception of the rendering in the back, This photo was actually taken on August 14th when we went out to survey the back of the woods over here and to look back at the parking garage or parking structure. We actually had surveyors come out and put stakes in the ground where the road was going to go, as well as where the corners of the parking structure are. So this is what it would look like the day after a contractor finished, before the landscaping contractor comes on board. The next photo, which is a little hard to see, but the difference here is that the first layer of trees are going in. So those are the groupings of 3s and 5s, mostly evergreens, but some understory trees that are being planted directly between the park road, or the campus road, and the parking structure. The next layer are the alley of deciduous trees, and these are, the scale of these trees are really what you would see in the first year or two of implementation before they start growing. And the last layer that we see are the evergreens, mostly evergreens with some deciduous trees that we would use to try to see how effective we could possibly be to try and screen whatever views we potentially would have from the neighbors of that parking structure.
Is it your intention to work with the neighbors and your on-site to place those trees from the view of the homes that are on, what is that, Woodcrest?
Woodcrest. I think the school, we are amenable to doing that, certainly.
Okay.
Yes.
I have a question. Now, why, did you mention dawn redwoods was one of the trees you're going to put in?
Yes.
Why dawn redwoods? Because they drop their foliage in the wintertime. That's why I'm curious.
Correct. They are on all the trees that we are specifying are straight from the Radnor Shade Tree Commission. So that is part of the mix. Actually, I've mentioned dawn redwoods. I believe they're actually being planted down here. That's a part of this whole site plan for this parking garage, or parking structure, pardon me. So this is the ADA ramp that Richard was talking about earlier to get access back up into here. Along the parking structure itself and these groups of evergreens will be mostly the spruces and arborvitaes in that area.
And then the forest that's back behind there that you've been pointing to, you're not going to put dawn redwoods back there, right?
No.
Okay.
I'm going to turn this back over to Rob.
So I think we answered the questions or tried to address the questions that came up at the meeting last month. If you have any additional questions, we'd be happy to answer them, or any questions from the neighbors.
Any questions,
Yes.
comments from the board?
Yeah, last month, I asked you how high the garage was from the surface, the highest point. So I'm still curious.
36 feet 1 inch.
That's the highest point.
What's that?
That is the highest point on that's the parapet wall?
That's the parapet wall that faces the neighbors is 36 feet 1 inch at this corner. So the highest.
Why don't you show us on that cutaway that you had?
Sure. I'll show, actually here might be that right there, right at the top of that corner.
Can you show us where, in the overhead shot, from where that photograph was taken?
Sure.
I believe if I can see this correctly, 7:30. We were standing right about here, because that's where the Pachysandra is coming in, over here. So we were standing back in this portion of the woods, looking back towards the parking structure.
Any other questions from the board?
So the loop road there, is that maybe when the public, not the loop road, but the road that's kind of going over the existing road?
This?
Rob, yeah, that. So that's been there a long time, right?
Yes.
Yes.
That's the low road? Okay.
That's the main entrance off of King of Prussia.
Right. There's no talk of moving that and pulling that away, right? Because it's functioning well and all that. Okay. What's your parking count going to be by the time you add in these dorms and You know, we did a parking count when they built when they added onto the athletic center.
So the total proposed parking are 993 spaces. This is a net addition of 61 spaces.
And I can't remember because you guys are in compliance, you have more than enough, you don't have enough, I can't remember what you are.
We have a 944 space nonconformity. So we have almost 1,000 space nonconformity that we.
You're short 1,000.
Yes, correct.
And this is going to improve it by how many?
This maintains the existing nonconformity.
But you said you're going to be putting in more parking.
Correct, because the residence hall will require 61 additional spaces.
So you're just adding in enough spaces to maintain the existing nonconformity?
Correct.
Okay.
That current drive, have you driven up and seen that current drive, how it works, and how complicated that parking area is right there? I think the loop will really help people get through that area and get from that one road up to the Dixon Athletic Center and places like that.
Yeah, that's not the part I was thinking about. So why did you, since you got the existing nonconformity, you know, and you're building the parking structure down here, I understand the rationale for that, but how come you're not building up near Dixon and correcting some of the nonconformity?
Well, as we talked about in 2012 and again in 2014, there really isn't a parking problem on campus. And if we built 944 additional parking spaces, we'd have 944 empty parking spaces.
Yeah, that's a funny thing, right? So you guys have the numbers make it seem like you have a shortage, but you don't actually have a shortage.
Correct.
Do you just have a lack of a lack of on-site students who bring their cars?
I think it's the way the tabulation is done, that you're counting a dining hall, a residence hall, and a classroom all get counted for parking, but it's actually used by the same person.
Okay. All right.
There's a lot of, you can drive through that parking lot.
No, I know
it's
it's. I've never
Yeah.
heard about this place being crowded. That's why I couldn't
Never.
remember if it was a nonconformity or not.
Are there any other comments on where we are so far here?
Yeah, I guess I'm still struggling to see how the new location benefits you, other than the discussion about the ADA, because who do you intend to be parking there?
So the new location, or proposed location really, it comes off of King of Prussia Road. So you have King of Prussia Road on the bottom right, and you have Upper Gulf on the upper left. And this is almost the midpoint between both of those entrances. And looking at various traffic counts, we had 50% of our vehicles coming in at peak hours coming in off of King of Prussia, 40% coming in off of Upper Gulf. So really this is a centralized location. It does provide access to the core of campus. We're removing, as part of this, we're removing 67 parking spaces in the core of campus. So replacing those in close proximity to the core of campus is important. And by providing those spaces with the parking structure here, people are able to exit the parking structure, and if they exit out of the higher exit, they can walk at grade in an accessible path across the front of Founders, right into the core of campus. You have the mansion and the science building up into the upper left, Grace Hall there, that you can actually access through the core of campus.
So it's intended really for commuters?
It's intended for all. It could be faculty, it could be staff, it could be commuting students. It's an open parking structure.
You said maybe, oh, sorry, go ahead.
And you can access, from Upper Gulf, you can access this new structure by driving through the lot?
They would drive through the parking lot, through the loop road, and then right into the entrance. There's one entrance and exit to this parking structure right in this location.
It's somewhere in all the material we got on this, there was a discussion about that the level of service isn't that great on Eagle and King of Prussia Road. And it strikes me that by moving the garage here, as opposed to where it was in the 2014 plan, it's going to encourage people to use King of Prussia Road rather than to drive from Upper Gulf and cut through a parking lot.
We have less than 10% of the traffic on King of Prussia Road. So I don't think that anything we do on campus is actually going to actually impact the underlying conditions and pass-through traffic that you're experiencing at King of Prussia, Pine Tree, and Eagle.
When you say we have less than 10%, you mean you're...
Cabrini. Cabrini
Right,
is
but
less.
it's already a problem. So if you go from 10% to 20%, it aggravates King of Prussia.
I would actually contend, and this is not from a study, this is just from being local to the area and driving. If I were coming from the north and going to Cabrini, I'm going to use Upper Gulf because I'm not going to contend with the backup that comes up King of Prussia Road all the way around where they dress the dog, or used to dress the dog. You're going to make the right onto Upper Gulf and go left into campus and be on campus. You're not going to come, if you're coming from the south, you're going to try to get onto campus and you're going to make the left into that entrance. So I don't think that the location of the garage, if you were coming from the north, you're still going to enter that same driveway.
I'd like to take, if there's no further comments from the board, I'd like to take
I have another
comments.
comment.
Yes.
With the access road that's being proposed, and you're discontinuing the use of the road that's between what's now a proposed garage and an existing building, what is the slope on that proposed road? That's a pretty steep area there, and why not continue that existing road on what would be the left of the garage and leave that all wooded to provide a larger buffer for the neighbors?
I don't know the slope off the top of my hand. I know it was code compliant. The area in between Founders Hall and the parking structure, there is an existing driveway there. I don't know if any of you have driven on that driveway. It's a very steep, awkward driveway. It doesn't function very well. It's steep, especially when you get down to this existing driveway here. When we build the structure, one of the key points of building the structure and placing it where it is creating a pedestrian experience. Is that you're going to come out, you're not going to have to cross driveways. If you start inserting a driveway now between the parking structure and the pedestrian core, now you're crossing that same driveway that we're trying to, enhance the pedestrian experience on campus.
But you're talking about crossing a driveway after you've parked your car. I mean, it's a parking garage where you're crossing from. No one else has to cross that driveway other than the people in the garage.
Actually, this would be anyone going from one side of campus to the other would have to go through this if you did not have this link road. This is linking basically the north and south parts of the campus.
Right, but if you kept it where it is now, the only people crossing over it would be the people parking in that garage.
I'm not sure I follow your question.
So if you keep the road where it's existing rather than proposing the other road, the only people crossing that road are people exiting the garage to go across the street. It's people who just park their cars who are crossing that road. It's not as if the residents have to cross that on a regular basis. There's other ways around.
So there's a couple of other folks. A couple of other folks other than just folks going to parking. So the turnaround is also part of the shuttle system that connects students to the regional rail. So all the shuttles would come into that loop, right? So any students who are coming, there'd be a spot in the base here by the stair for them to hang out of the weather, wait for the shuttle to arrive when it's crummy in the wintertime. So anyone going there would also be crossing that road, and then anyone coming from these two residence halls that are coming up this path would also be.
Isn't that a walkway to the left of the square? To the left of the square, yes, isn't that a walkway to the left?
Yes, there is today, but if
So wouldn't they still have access to that walkway?
I guess you're right, that folks would have.
So the only people who really have to cross that existing driveway are the people exiting the garage and going across the top.
Right. Well, there are a couple of challenges that we wouldn't be able to keep the existing driveway, as Rob said, and so
Well, I guess the slope, to me, I don't know what the proposed slope is on that outside road. If it's similar to the existing road, then either way you have to do some grading. But if you look at all those trees that you're planting and all that driveway you're proposing and envision that as woods, wouldn't that be more palatable to the people who are on Woodcrest?
Yes and no. Well, Rob can address the slope issue. I know that from the standpoint of how much regrading we'd have to do for the garage, there's not going to be a whole lot of difference. There's a little bit of difference, but there's not a whole lot of difference in terms of the regrading we would need to do for the road versus just the garage.
It
So
seems to me
I'm not
that-
sure we're going to reduce the number of trees that we'd have to cut down.
I'm just saying, if you kept the road where, the existing road where it is and regraded it, and instead of proposing a new road on the outside near the neighbors, and kept the traffic internal between the garage and the building, that would be less of an impact to the neighbors.
I think they're trying to remove the traffic from the internal part.
You're trying to get rid of the driveway between Founders and the new garage.
Correct.
They want to
Yeah.
get rid of that
Because
road.
Yeah.
That's why they put trees there.
But I'm wondering what that benefits the campus much, other than not having the people from the garage cross a road. Because to the neighbors, it makes a big difference in how many trees are coming out and the impact.
You're also doing that to get the link from, if you're on King of Prussia Road and you want to get up to that parking lot, is that?
Correct.
And then that's how you connect to the north part of the campus. So that road.
But that road that's in there now between the garage and the building would do the same job.
Yeah, but think about the tight corner that would be taking. People would come up the loop and they'd
But
go
remember, this is a proposed garage that they can
wiggle
site
around.
how they need.
No,
Well,
that's true.
Not really. There's, Rob, if you want to mention the grades, then I can.
Yeah, so there's a couple things. So the grades, we have existing grades at this point and existing grades at this point, right? And so connecting this, we have a very, it is a slope, but it's a manageable slope with a constant grade and a curve. Bringing the area up across the parking structure, we're going to have flat portions just because of turning movements and maneuverability. And so we actually reduce the distance that we have to make up that. So this area right now is very steep for that existing road. If we were softening the curve that you were talking about, what it does is it actually pushes the structure closer to the neighbors and the property line. So we've tucked the structure in. We have the road on the outside of that. The road's much lower. Obviously, it's at grade. We're able to mitigate that, the impacts of that, and it creates a better circulation pattern throughout campus.
Why not put the garage directly next to the building and attach it to the existing building and push it even further?
Answer that. Because we'd lose half the use of the building, we can't tie it to the building. There's classrooms, there's.
Oh, I thought that building was above that
Founders.
location. I thought that the building itself was above the height of the garage. From the picture that we saw, most of it was above the garage.
Well, there are floors that are above it, but there are floors that are below that, but, at the level of the garage too. So there are places where there
But aren't they below ground anyhow?
No.
They're not.
No.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's right.
All right,
Just
why
from
don't
a-
we move on to questions from neighbors? I'm interested in hearing their comments, what their position is at this point. Is there a representative of the neighborhood group that could speak for the group? Has any one person been appointed as a spokesperson?
We just put up I just want to say we just put up a
Okay.
different map, just so
Okay.
you could see everyone's addresses, so if that's helpful to all of you, just in your understanding with.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Well, somebody walks up. Howard, you're going to talk later about the trees, about the emerald ash? Great, thanks.
Yes, sir.
My name is Franklin Brown. I live on Woodcrest Road,
What number?
726.
Okay. Okay.
I was not appointed, but I wanted to make some comments. We had about 4 neighbors at the previous meeting of the Planning Commission, and after the word got out of what was being proposed, a lot of people got very exercised, and I believe there were about 40 at the Cabrini briefing Tuesday night a week ago. Relative to the tall trees, the Trade Commission, or the Commission, Shade Tree Commission, I understand, has approved this, but we like very much the tall trees that we see in the area, and taking down 118, whatever it is, tall trees, and putting up a bunch of 3- and 4-foot trees that will take 20 years to grow, I'm not sure is really a good answer to this. I think that's sort of a negative trade-off in due respect to the Shade Tree Commission. we have heard or read the school's rationalizations as to what they want, but we really feel the main issue here is the proposed location of the new garage and the road around it. The resulting noise and traffic lights and traffic and the lights from the parking garage and the cars would be a real affront to the neighbors. Saying that, I do respect the comments and adjustments made by Cabrini to lessen the problem with the lights, and I congratulate them for listening to some of the concerns we expressed earlier. However, we feel that the parking needs should be addressed in the middle of the campus rather than backed up to Woodcrest Road. The students would have easy access and not be visible, and the parking garage there would not be visible to the neighbors and would certainly not inconvenience the students because it'd be in the center of campus. I therefore respectfully request and urge the Planning Commission to reject the proposal from Cabrini, specifically relative to the location of the parking garage and the road around it. Thank you very much.
Is there somebody else? Yes, come up, please. Hi, your name and address, please.
Good evening. My name is Rosine Risha. I live 711 Woodcrest Circle. Good evening to all of you and to everyone here. I do support Mr. Brown, and I also wanted to bring up some other things that, some other aspects that just kind of popped into my head in terms of the landscaping and some of the suggestions that I understand were brought to the Planning Committee. And there are a few things. In terms of the driveway, that loop, the fact that it's going to be lined with deciduous trees, I have to say, is not going to really provide much protection in terms of the winter when all the trees fall. And you just have the trunks. It'll be just as visible as if when the cutout was just preliminary. And I certainly appreciate the evergreens and on the outside, but I would like to know why the road is not going to be aligned with evergreens and why the deciduous trees were proposed to be put in there as well. The other thing that I understand is that there was a suggestion to make the parking garage underground, which I think would also eliminate a lot of the concerns, and I'm not sure why that suggestion was not taken. And the third thing, the gentleman sitting next to you brought up a very good point about King of Prussia Road. And I can say, as a resident of the area, with the addition of this parking lot, it will add to the congestion on King of Prussia Road. I can tell you because I know the traffic patterns there, and I hear where you're coming from, but I can tell you as a resident, it will increase the traffic congestion there. And I just wanted to just reinforce that. And especially with the plan for a lot of the deciduous trees and things like that, and to further support my neighbor. I think it's important to bring those things to light because even though it looks beautiful in the picture, when it's springtime and summertime and you have all the leaves and everything protecting the light and the noise, we don't have that in wintertime. Right. And I think that's something to consider.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time, and thank you.
Anybody else from the audience? Could I have a show of hands of how many people are opposed to this proposal? Raise your hand if you are opposed. Okay. Of those people, and actually the others also, are any of you happy with the suggestions they have made to lessen the light output? Raise your hand. No? Okay. All right, thank you. Any other comments from the audience? Yes, please, come on up.
Hi, it's my pleasure to make a comment this evening. I actually live at 175 Berwyn Circle.
And your name, please?
I am Janice Jacobs.
Thank you.
So one of the things that I noticed is that Cabrini has become a university, and as such, will be developing more graduate programs, which will bring more students onto campus. So that issue has not been addressed in any of this, except alluded to, I think, by this gentleman. So just wanted to make sure that that's a concern, increasing traffic over time. And King of Prussia Road is terrible at night. It's terrible in the morning. It's hard to get out
Just
my
plain
driveway.
terrible.
Yes.
Okay.
So just to add to the facts that as you become a university, you add graduate programs, you add many more students in the evening.
Right. Thank
Okay?
you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir, come on up.
Question, did they say they were going to take a parking lot down of 60 cars and add the one of 61? So you're maintaining it? Did I hear something? Did I misunderstand that? I thought they were moving a lot. Did someone say that?
So we're removing 67 parking spaces out of the core of campus to create pedestrian. Right now in the center of campus, it's really driveways that all the students walk on, and people park along them. And so you can't walk across campus without looking over your shoulder. And so what we're doing is removing those cars from the core of campus and being able to put them in the parking structure.
Okay, that's what I thought you had said, but the lady just talked kind of inferred that you weren't doing that. Yes, this is just really an exchange of spaces.
Correct. It's an exchange of spaces. We are increasing by 61, as Susan pointed out, for the residence hall.
Do you expect your student population to stay approximately the same?
So
I know you want to raise it, and you're at a low point right now.
Right. It's really about maintaining and getting to about 1,600 students is the goal. They've been in excess of 2,000 students. That was too much for them. Their goal is around 1,600.
And what are you presently?
Approximately 1,500.
Okay, not that much different.
Right.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir.
Everyone, my name is Tom Rogers, and I live at 712 Woodcrest Circle. And I have one question, and that is the parking garage as it's shown there. How many parking spaces? I missed that, so I apologize. How many parking spaces are in that garage?
Was that 66?
174 spaces.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so it's 174 spaces, and if you'll notice, it's at the southeastern part of the campus. And they're saying that 40% are going to access from Upper Gulf and 60% from King of Prussia. I propose that the majority of them, 100, whatever the number is, will access off of King of Prussia, which means that's going to create one hell of a problem during the traffic from 5 o'clock through 6:30. And I don't see the reason why that parking garage is there. And I think the majority of people will use that. It's going to create a traffic problem on King of Prussia. And I think it's, plus the fact, if you see where I live, 712, it's going to create more headlights coming into my bedroom at night. I mean, there is enough now with the people coming in and out of the evening students that attend that college. With 166 more coming down there, I mean, I'm not going to be able to go to sleep at night because of the headlights that are coming into my bedroom. So I'm totally against it. I support all my neighbors.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So because I wasn't here last month, I am dying to ask the question, why it is that, and this picture is really illuminating it perfectly for me, why is that parking structure not to the west, over on the Valley Forge side, utilizing the driveway that comes in off of Upper Gulf Road and over near where we suggested you put the parking lot a few years ago, and there's a building, it's right above the INI of Cabrini. So why isn't that parking garage sitting right about with the CAB of Cabrini is. It's just as centered to the campus, just on the western side. It would really force people, encourage people to use Upper Gulf Road, which would take some of the pressure off of King of Prussia, and you could still do your turnaround and fix your circulation problem over on the other side.
So one of the things I wanted to point out was that with the Dixon area parking and the Widener parking, which I don't think anyone would argue is easily accessible off of Upper Gulf Road, we have about 560 parking spaces. So more than half of our parking is actually more easily accessed off of Upper Gulf. The parking structure that we're proposing here is more toward the southern parking structure. Yes, it is easier to access off King of Prussia and Upper Gulf, but it is accessible from Upper Gulf and about the midpoint. The area that you're talking about here on the western edge is a little bit harder. If you came in the King of Prussia Road entrance, you'd have to go all the way through kind of, we call it Residential Drive, the South Driveway, all the way back through campus to get there, where this, again, is you're coming off of King of Prussia Road, you're being able to park and then get out and walk.
My point is that if you put the garage over where you just said, I don't know what that long building is, that north-south building, what is that?
The science building, I don't know.
Thank you. So if the parking garage were to the west of that.
So this area to the west is steep slopes. There's a large stormwater basin down in this location, but this whole area right in here are steep slopes.
Any more steep than where you're already talking about?
Yes, they're prohibitively steep.
Prohibitively steep. Okay.
So going south is there's a big grade change. A person from the audience asked if we could move the structure further south. When you're going further south, there's a large grade change.
But you're going to be proposing in another phase, putting in that parking garage on Eagle Road, which also has steep slopes.
There's slopes on either side of the driveway, so that would be replacing as part of a future part of the master plan is putting that on the south side along this residential drive. Yes, we were proposing
And building
it there.
that structure into the slope on the western side of the science building. You can't achieve all the same things. Here's my problem, Rob. So I wasn't here last month. I would have said this to you last month. And I have no memory whatsoever of encouraging you all to put a parking structure where you're putting it right now when you came back in 2014. There's no way that this girl said, oh yeah, please put a parking structure over near the neighbors, because they're going to love that. That's why I remember we had this big conversation about doing it up near Dixon, and that's why I thought the parking garage was going to go. So it still makes sense for a lot of headaches and a lot of reasons and the path of least resistance to try to find a way to put this parking garage on the western side of the property, which will really force/encourage people to use the Upper Gulf entrance, which is going to help King of Prussia Road, and is, you've got not residential neighbors, on your to the west. So that's my comment. I would have said it last month. I'm sure I said it 3 years ago.
Rob, what is the difference in elevation between the top of the parking level of the garage and the parking lot that is behind it that everybody drives through right now?
So it's going to be the northwest corner, this corner right here. I believe it was 6 or 8 feet.
Basically, you're parking at the very top, pretty much just a little bit higher than that current level.
Correct. We're pushing the whole structure into the ground to really mitigate impact to the neighbors and to the campus. The only place that is fully exposed is this south face. Everything else starts to get pushed in as you go around the building.
Is it possible to enter in at a midpoint of the garage and push it down one more level? In other words, you come into the garage and you can go up or down so that you could push it down maybe 6 or 8 more feet so it's maybe flush. I mean, I don't know if that would help everybody because then it would not be any higher than your current parking situation.
Well,
I don't know.
From a visibility standpoint, you do have Founders Hall right behind it, in your same view shed. One of the things is looking at distances. You're 330 feet from the property line to the corner of the structure. And the way the structure is oriented is almost at a 45-degree angle to the property line. So you're really looking at the corner at that tightest part. And then it's getting further away on both sides. The loop road, I believe it was 285 feet. The code has two separate setbacks. One is 125 feet for driveways, and then for a parking structure, it would be 200 feet. And so the code already recognizes that a parking structure would have more impact than a road, and so it suggests pushing that back further. So where the road would require 125 feet, I think it was 285, and then the structure was required 200, we're at 330. So we're exceeding the codes by a large margin.
I have a sort of a question, I guess, partially for the neighbors. I was just looking at this map, or the plan. There's 260 surface parking spots right now with no walls, no barriers, cars come and go. How do you deal with that light situation now? I don't know if one of you want to speak to that or not. And the other thing I noticed in this plan, and I'm not an apologist for the applicant, but they're removing 60 of those surface spots and hiding them, so to speak, inside this garage. I mean, does that seem to be a possibly better trade-off than you might have thought?
Where are the 60 spots being removed from? Not near the neighbors.
No, in the middle of the campus.
I believe what Skip's referring to is there's parking spaces that are down in this area that are being removed, and some parking spaces up in this lot that are going to be removed.
I thought I understood you to say you were removing parking spaces, 67 parking spaces from the middle of the campus to make it more pedestrian.
We are. There's a parking table we're removing to provide better circulation and maneuverability. We're removing parking spaces out of this lot. We're removing parking spaces here to provide the ADA accessibility. And so there's different areas that we're removing pieces.
Well, and also this is supposed to accomplish getting the ADA compliance so that people who need to get from the lower dorms can get up. So it's also a vehicle for the transportation of those people. So
correct.
So I don't know, is there a way that we
park.
can find a happy medium so that, I don't know,
And
trying to solve the problem.
Skip, what you were referring to before was that, in this location, I believe this is about 125 feet right in this area, is what you're referring to, is about the parking.
Well, when we approved the plan initially, the garage was on the other side, and that road that you're proposing over there wouldn't have had the same impact to the neighbors because all the trees would be on the other side of it still. And
so just this driveway on the approved plan was actually, it was about this location in this area, but once you got further up, it actually went closer to the neighbors. So this actually looped around here, and that is our approved loop road that was
right,
approved
but behind
in
it would be
2012 and
trees,
2014.
not a parking garage, right? So it would be a totally different scenario because you'd be looking across.
On the institutional master plan that Richard presented previously, is there was actually an addition to this building that was proposed that would come out to a similar distance to what the parking structure was. So this was
In the approved master plan that we approved?
It wasn't on the master plan. It was on the institutional development plan, which was submitted as part of the application.
I'm referring to the approved master plan.
The approved plan.
The approved preliminary plan.
Yeah.
Well, right now, we're talking about this parking structure
Right, but
here.
what I'm saying is when we approved that little road there, it had different impacts. I don't like it there now that it's in front of a garage. I'd like to either see that road go away or the garage go back where it was proposed. That's my personal feeling. And we're a planning commission, that's my recommendation, is that we should plan smarter for the neighbors.
Not at the moment. We'll get to.
Yeah, it's coming. This is just, yeah. Kath?
This is, I'm George Brosman. I'm the attorney representing the applicant. I just wanted to point out, I think these points have been made, but a couple big picture items that I've seen. First of all, WRT, Wallace, Robertson, Todd, they're too, they don't want to be too bragging about their credentials, but they're a nationally recognized firm that specializes in campus master planning. So Cabrini has brought the best to bear on this. And they have prepared, I think, a beautiful plan, something that I think could win awards. They're taking parking out of the core of campus, and they're improving ADA accessibility. And Rob touched on this, but the PI code, they have specific uses that are categorized, Category 2 being the more intense uses that are expected uses, permitted uses, and they specifically list a parking structure. That's a specifically allowed use, and it specifically says that a 200-foot setback is required, and that's what that line on that plan is. At that one corner, we're 330 feet. That's 65% more. On the other corners, where some of the neighbors spoke, you're several hundred feet away. I don't even know if headlights would go that far, but Cabrini still made modifications and switched the plan around to address that. I also noticed on the plan, if you look at just big picture impacts on the neighbors, this is the PI zoning district. They've got about 112 acres. They're allowed to have 30% building coverage. This plan brings it to 6%. They're required to have 55% landscape area. With this plan, they're about 75% landscape area. So the big picture, and the Delaware County Planning Commission also said it, that the improvements are well within the core of the property and large setbacks are provided. So even putting the structure here in the loop road, it's greatly exceeding the setbacks. We do comply with all of the codes. The university have met with the neighbors on many occasions, so we really hope that you will recommend this for approval.
A point of clarification, are you asking for any waivers?
I believe there's only one waiver requested, which has been granted in similar plans, and that is to show the features within 500 feet.
Okay.
I think that's routinely granted and has been granted here. Am I correct on that, Rob? It was granted as part of preliminary. I believe everything else will comply with the letters, no waivers, no variances.
So you far exceed the setbacks. And I think we need to keep that in mind in light of other things that have happened in this township. And look at the good side of things also. Now, I know neighbors are always upset when there's a change in the area, but these people are allowed to do this by code. They don't necessarily need our permission to do it, and I think they're going out of their way to try to accommodate you and be good neighbors. And I understand you're upset it's a change, which I recognize it is, but they are allowed by the code and by the township to put in these things, and they're actually doing much less than what they're allowed to put in.
We appreciate their efforts, but we don't believe they would feel the same way if this was happening.
You have to come up to the microphone, please.
There was another lady here who wanted to speak. Can you come up to the microphone, please?
My name's Kathy Abuna. I'm at 734, so I'm one of those affected by that wide-open parking lot. And I do get a lot of light. I've adjusted to it. I must admit right now, when the trees are up, it's not so bad, but in the winter, it is a lot of light, but it's a lot of noise. It's a lot of movement, and I think my main concern is the loop road. I don't know why the garage wasn't built on the parking lot that exists right now. The cars go up there, they park there, the garage is there, it's close to the area already, you're not taking down a lot of trees. If it's tucked up close to the buildings that are there now, they have access to go right into the common area, and if they took the road that comes off of Eagle and have the road run behind the science building, because I know it's steep and they can't put a parking lot there, at least that's what they've told us, you're going to have access going on either side, up and down. I think with the new plan, if you come in Eagle, I think you have to loop all the way down and around to get up over to the fields. I walk in Cabrini a lot, and I'm often directing people how to get there. I understand wanting to walk. When I walk there, you do have cars everywhere, but there's also no sidewalks. And this is something I said when they were here a couple years ago. I said, put sidewalks in. then you won't have to be walking on the road. You'll be walking beside the road. Handicapped people can use sidewalks. If this garage is to help handicapped people come a small portion, they're already going up a switchback. So I don't know why something can't devise that they can just continue on further to get up into the campus and the garage being shifted over onto the parking lot. There's no loop road.
Okay, we'll ask them. Would the applicant like to address putting it on the surface parking lot?
So if we put it on the surface parking lot, I believe the area that she was referencing was what we refer to as the Widener lot. One thing is, note the 200-foot setback line, so we have to build it between that and the building itself. You'd be increasing the size of it substantially because you're displacing all the parking that would be underneath it. And so the size of the parking structure gets larger, and it would be above ground rather than in this area where we're tucking it into the ground. So there's a couple areas we've considered it, we looked at it, and believe this is a far superior location for it.
Rob, it would also be significantly closer to those properties up there, correct?
Yes.
So
We'd be 200 feet instead of, you'd really have to push the limit on that
Right.
setback.
So I really liked the way you did that layered landscape plan. I don't know who that gentleman, it's very nice. But Howard, can you talk about the emerald ash? Because I know that is something that's going to, when we talk about the screening around the whole property, we are risking losing that in the next, how many years.
Yeah, we have two species of ash. It's Fraxinus americana and Fraxinus pennsylvanica. One's white ash, one's green ash. And we are evaluating the condition of those ash trees. Some of them are not worth saving, and we're trying to find the ones that are, and if we can save those, we will. So that's our stance on the ashes right now.
Will you be working to kind of replant or replace even those ash separate from this plan?
I really can't address that for sure. I mean, we have an excess of trees on this plan to begin with. And perhaps if we discover there are lots of ashes that we should remove, we can relocate some of those. For example, around the tennis courts, they're proposing to put some trees. We really don't need to put trees there. If we had to put them back in the woods, we would.
I guess you have to be careful with the Shade Tree Commission recommendations are not really for buffering. A shade tree is for shade trees, and when they make recommendations, it's for replacing canopy. So that is not exactly what the neighbors are looking for here. And when we look at that photo, it looks great, except that when you have that much shade, you're not going to have that much evergreen. So those full Christmas tree shaped evergreens are going to be a lot more bare. I think things like rhododendrons will grow better than evergreens there because there's just so much shade. And I think you have to be very careful about what is used as screening because evergreens that don't thrive won't do much for privacy for the neighbors.
I think most of the evergreens they were putting in was around the parking structure. There was a few back in the woods, but
right, Kathy. But if you know the site, it's very shady in general. And if you look at they were interplanting, those interplantings aren't going to do a whole lot if they're an evergreen type of thing. If they're more like a rhododendron, more like a lower bushier type of thing, might actually have a chance in all that shade. But again, that's why I'm not in favor of that loop road combined with the garage, is because you're taking out so much more, and it's quite steep, just as the existing road is there. So I don't know how closely you can plant to that road. I don't know if there's going to be a retaining wall to support that road, or how that's going to be graded, because you can't really plant trees on a steep slope like that and expect them to be stable.
Now, there are species of evergreens that we can plant in the woods that will provide the screening. There's hollies, like you say, rhododendrons, that'll take a while to grow. We'll even put in some Norway spruce. They tolerate shade, and they also tolerate dry conditions. We've used that elsewhere on the campus with great success. I was chair of the Shade Tree Commission for 20 years, so I understand where people come from when they're talking about trees. Yeah.
So Kathy, walk me through the master plan revision is basically preliminary plan approval of this? And then
Yeah, that's
final
why I
plan
was
is
thinking
really-
we should probably look at this plan first, because that might determine what happens with the master plan.
Well, so it's two different items on the agenda.
Yes,
I'm just trying to be
right.
clear what we're approving. Okay.
Aren't we approving flight number 2?
Well, we started out with that.
Yeah, but that's
But then we
phase 2 is
switched
the
over
guard-
to the development, which was 5. Or, I'm sorry, do I have it backwards? Yeah, I thought it'd be better to go with the development first, because that would determine what happens to the master plan.
So we're going to vote on 2 first, the final land development plan?
Number 5.
Number 5.
If you want, I can spend 30 seconds and
Number 5.
explain
You
what
said-
one's on
Number
what.
5 says, you're talking about
Okay.
214D05?
Yes.
And that's the final land development plan for phase 2.
That's the parking structure, right?
Right. That's
Okay.
what we're talking about now,
We're going to take
correct?
that first,
Okay, yes, right.
since that's what we've been talking about
I
all night
understand.
long.
That's what I'm.
And then where that goes determines the plan revision.
So I was going to say, I think, I'm not sure, I defer to council if they, I think you actually have to approve the preliminary first and then the final. But I'll explain real fast. So the plan that is an illustrative plan of the plans that you have in front of you up on the screen. And what this shows is the final plan. And so this plan shows phase 1, which was already completed, and that's identified on it was a one-sheet plan that was submitted as the amendment plan. And then it shows the student center, which was unchanged from the 2012 and 2014 preliminary plan. It shows the south parking structure, which is unchanged from the 2012-2014 approved preliminary plan. What it added to it or modified was we added the residence hall, we changed the western turnaround, we moved the location of the parking structure, the loop road is consistent with what was previously approved, and the eastern turnaround was added. And so that is the overall final plan, and all the numbers and everything else associated with that is on that one sheet. The preliminary plan is really only what is shown in red. And so that is, or I'm sorry, the final plan is only what's shown in red. And so that's phase 2, that's what's currently moving to the final plan. And that was the larger plan set that you received that had all the details and the landscaping and all the different pieces for that piece.
All right, thank you.
Rob, quick question, just because I don't remember. When you all build the parking garage, the south parking garage in phase 3, I vaguely remember you were also planning on taking up surface parking at that time as well?
Yes, there was some shifting of surface parking. There's some existing surface parking down along the south area that would be relocated. We will also have a parking requirement for the displacement of spaces on the north side by the student center, and also the student center has a parking requirement because
Sure.
obviously the way the code was written.
So the surface parking lot that's on the eastern side of the property, none of that gets ripped up in conjunction with the south parking structure being built? You don't change that surface parking lot that we just
There were
discussed?
some enhancements to it, but not a wholesale removal of large sections.
Okay, thank you.
One more comment from the audience. You've had 3 now, I think, maybe 4. Come on up.
Tom Rogers from 712. With all respect to legalese, I thoroughly understand the situation, but there is, if there was an alternative to place that parking garage someplace else, I could understand it. But there has been proposals previously to move the parking garage to the upper part of the campus. The neighbors support this, the neighbors want this, and I speak for the neighbors and hope that the Planning Commission consider moving that garage up to the other section. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Board, do we have a recommendation?
I recommend that we accept the final land development plan, phase 2. Is that correct?
That's number 5?
That's number 5.
Right. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded that we approve the plan that is before us currently for the parking structure and the other modifications there with the loop road. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 for, opposed, 3 against, so it carries. The next item then would be the master plan. Is there a recommendation on the master plan, or do we need to go over something with the master plan? Okay.
Yeah, why don't we go? I'm not really sure how that kind of links into what we just passed. Is this bringing in the other phases as well?
Do you want me to take a
Yes,
try?
please.
Yeah.
So there was a master plan that had preliminary plan approval that envisioned 3 phases. Phase 1, which has been completed. Phase 2, which you just voted to recommend approval for the final plan. And then a Phase 3, which is not before anybody yet. So there's a master plan that had preliminary plan approval. And the concept was that Cabrini would come to the township at each phase they wanted to do and get a final plan approval. So that master plan approval, Cabrini came and got final plan approval for Phase 1 and built that. We're here for Phase 2 for final plan approval, which you recommended approval for. So as a technical matter, we need to also amend the preliminary master plan basically to make it consistent with the final plan you just approved. So Rob submitted that one sheet, and it basically shows the changes to the approved preliminary master plan that are consistent with the Phase 2 final plan that you just approved.
Okay.
So it's almost like a housekeeping matter, but it is something we do need to get that amended preliminary plan approved.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments from the board on that? Nope.
I
Okay, is
move
there a
we
motion?
approve the preliminary land development plan, which is 217D04.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and second that we approve. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 2 opposed. Okay, so carries 6-2. Okay, is there any additional public comment about other items other than what we've just spoken about? On any other subjects? No? Okay. Any old business with the board? New business?
Who's serving on the comp plan?
I have no idea. Let's see if we can answer that question first. Does anybody from the staff know who is serving on the comp plan?
From planning, I'm sorry.
From planning, if anybody? Nope, I guess we don't know. Right. All right, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.